Thank you, Mark. So 6 months ago in Sydney, we talked about what we see and hear from users who are trying to operate open infrastructure, what their biggest problem is, and that is trying to figure out how to put all of this technology together. There's so much of it. And so we said, this is something that, as a foundation, we want to invest in. We want to help our users and our operators be able to better build systems with open source tools. And since then, in the last 6 months, we've actually made a lot of progress in a lot of different areas. There we talked about how we saw 4 steps that are really required to make integration work across multiple projects. The first step is figuring out what the common use cases are for these multiple projects when you want to put them together. And if you look at some of those use cases that are really common, containers and virtualization are definitely high up there. In OpenStack specifically, we have a lot of Kubernetes environments that are running in OpenStack clouds. When we do our user survey, about half of the people that tell us which frameworks they're running say they are running Kubernetes. So thousands of OpenStack clouds out there running Kubernetes too. And we recently published a community-written document that describes how to do that successfully with a number of different approaches. We also have a lot of other work going on in the container integration space, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along.
Yes, and that document was actually produced by SIG OpenStack in the Kubernetes community, which is a great example of collaborating across communities, which we've been doing a lot this last year, really, in 6 months. And this week here at the summit, we're going to have lots of open source communities that are working with us in these sessions. So we ask you to welcome them. There should be a lot of productive discussions, and it's really important that we not only build those integration points in the technology, but that we're building those relationships between the people across these communities.
And you mentioned integration points in the technology. As you start to look at these use cases and work together, you realize sometimes there are gaps in the technology, and we do need to make updates and improvements, or sometimes even create entire new projects. In the last 6 months, on the technical side, we've seen a lot of progress, both with a new release of OpenStack, the OpenStack Queens release. How many of you contributed to the Queens release cycle? Awesome. Well, thank you very much. As well as a new project, Kata Containers, that we're going to hear more about in just a few minutes, and Zool, which is a project that started in the OpenStack community but is now being adopted for continuous delivery and gating by a number of organizations. And we're going to hear about that as well.
Right. And finally, it is very important that we test everything end to end. So later on this morning, you're going to hear from the folks contributing to Open Lab, which is an initiative to test different tools and platforms across OpenStack clouds. Also want to talk about the support that we're giving to OpenCI, which is a new cross-community initiative started by Fatih and Robin and Melvin, who you'll hear from later, really defining those standards to test across different open source projects, which we think is really important. And finally, wanted to highlight the work, again, to break out the OpenStack provider for Kubernetes and also to get OpenStack into the CNCF cross-cloud dashboard, which was a really big milestone for our community, and again, supports all of these testing efforts that we think are so important.
So a lot of progress in those 4 areas, more to do for sure, and that's what a lot of sessions this week are going to cover. But I said we were going to dive a little deeper into those technologies. And if we start with the OpenStack project and the OpenStack kind of the core cloud services, there's still a lot that's happening there. And one of the things that is really exciting for me is to see the growth that we continue to see in the OpenStack user base. 451 Research recently did a report called Voice of the Service Provider. And globally, they found that 71% of service providers are using OpenStack in production or plan to within the next 12 months. And if you look out over 24 months, that actually goes up to 80%. So this is something that is achieving massive penetration in some of these markets. Speaking of markets, we also see a big commercial market building and continuing to grow. IDC did a report that said the market opportunity for OpenStack this year in 2018 is $6.1 billion. So we're not quite halfway through the year, so there's still $3 billion and change out there if you're looking for some business. And finally, our user survey that we use to track OpenStack deployments, we've now been able to identify 10 million plus cores of compute that is managed in OpenStack clouds. So that is a lot of infrastructure out there using our open source tools and a lot of other open source tools, and that's really exciting. To talk a little bit more about the technology updates, though, I want to bring out a couple of the OpenStack technical leaders. So help me welcome Melanie Witt and Doug Hellman. Welcome, Melanie and Doug. So, we talked about the Queens release that just came out, and we had our PTG where we started planning the next release. Melanie, maybe you can tell us about some of the recent updates in Queens.
Yeah, so in the Queens release, we've added basic support for virtual GPUs in Nova. Previously, the only way to use GPUs in Nova is via PCI pass-through, where the physical GPU is passed from the compute host all the way to the guest. PCI pass-through has a drawback that a GPU cannot be shared among multiple virtual machines, and minimal device visibility to the compute host prevents you from monitoring the utilization of the GPU. With virtual GPUs, a vendor driver on the hypervisor is leveraged to provide the ability to divide a physical GPU into multiple virtual slices that can be shared among multiple virtual machines. And full device visibility to the compute host enables monitoring of GPU metrics. The basic support we've added in Queens and Nova enables you to request a quantity of virtual GPU resources when you create a server. And we're continuing to work on virtual GPUs this cycle in Rocky to implement additional functionality. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit about another cool thing we've been working on in the community called fast-forward upgrades. Fast-forward upgrades are the result of a collaborative community effort between developers and operators to codify a process for upgrading several release versions of OpenStack in one go. So while OpenStack releases a new version every 6 months, an organization might only upgrade every 18 months, for example. So fast-forward upgrades are designed to make it easy to upgrade to the latest release version of OpenStack when your organization is ready. As for how it works, the basic idea is that you'll take the control plane offline while your instances continue to run, and then you iterate over the upgrade steps per release version that you're fast-forwarding through. And then at the end, you'll bring the control plane back online. If you're interested in doing a fast-forward upgrade, you should take a look at OOO, where they've implemented fast-forward upgrades going from Newton to Queens that can generate an Ansible playbook for you. And there's also a wiki where operators who've successfully completed fast-forward upgrades have shared their experiences. So I encourage you to check that out and contribute your experiences too. This week at the summit, there's 2 talks, one on virtual GPUs in Nova and the other about fast-forward upgrades. So definitely add those to your schedule if you're interested in digging into more detail.
Awesome. Yeah, when I talk to operators, I hear a lot of them that are starting to put GPUs into their environments, and all of them are concerned about upgrades. So it's great to see these really operator-centric improvements going into the code base. And Doug, you have some other things that are happening kind of more broadly across the community that I know operators care about as well.
Yeah, that's right. So Melanie mentioned that many of our operators don't have the opportunity to upgrade within the window where the stable branch is still open and maintained. So we've been taking a look at that policy and decided to make some changes. So the first change is to simplify the rules about which patches we're going to accept when the stable branch is open for that first 18-month period. And then after that 18-month period, we will no longer tag releases, but we will continue to accept patches to the branch as long as there are people contributing to maintaining it and keeping the tests running. And then the other thing that we're doing this week is focusing on setting some goals for the next several cycles. So our community goals process is a really important aspect of bringing everybody together to focus their energy on a few simple tasks that we can do to simplify things or make the lives of our operators or users easier. So we've, in the past, done some work on managing policies for the role-based access controls for the APIs. And we have some plans to talk about simplifying the APIs and standardizing them across all of the different services so that OpenStack works a little bit more consistently. So we have a bunch of sessions this week to talk about all of these topics, and we really need operator and user feedback in those sessions. So please come join us and help us figure out what we're going to do.
Cool. Yeah. So if you care about any of these issues, like Melanie and Doug said, a lot of sessions this week. This last one on Thursday for the S release, which is Stein, I think is the name that's been chosen for that. That's a good one to start talking about, looking out into the future even farther, where we need to go. So come and participate in these for sure. And finally, one other update on the OpenStack project front. Last year, we released a map of OpenStack projects to kind of orient people to what the projects are, what the services are, how they fit together. You can see this at openstack.org/software. There's a link on there. And we have a new version of this up in time for the summit that takes into account some of the new projects that are out there, like Qinling and some others. So definitely go check that out. So thanks for the update on the OpenStack project. Next up, we're going to talk about Zuul. So to tell us about Zuul, please welcome James Blair.